Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
You are listening to Scream with Ryan C. Showers, the podcast for Scream fans just like you. Join Ryan every week as he takes a deep dive into the horror film series that defined the 90s and redefined the genre. Scream with Ryan C. Showers is your source for scene and quote analysis, character dissections, and the latest news about upcoming installments of the Scary Movie franchise.
I hear you like horror movies, Kirby, but do you like them as much as him?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Scream with Ryan C. Showers podcast, where the film critic meets the Scream fan twice a week, every Tuesday and Friday. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Before I go any further, I need to thank the producers of Scream with Ryan C. Showers. They include Ashley Summers from the Squirrel and Spud Shop. She and I host a Scream game every Wednesday on Instagram, so please check that out. I also need to thank TJ Jones, who comes from the Box Office Buds podcast. He is responsible for all of the graphic design of Scream with Ryan C. Showers in terms of new episode cards on social media promotion. So thank you so much to TJ for all he does. I also need to thank contributors Mark Karim, Mark Vieira, and Joey Velisi. Joey Velisi is the guy who writes the scripts for Scream with Ryan C. Showers. Episode 112, we wrote a Scream 7 script, which I read out loud, about the end of the Carpenter sisters storyline. And then the sequel to that was called Screams. It was centered around the legacy of Gale Weathers. That's episode 155. And Joey is currently working on the final Scream, which this is a product that is going to examine the relationship, the marriage of Mark and Sydney. Unlike the real Scream 7, this will feature Mark Kincaid as Sydney's husband, and she won't have a teenage daughter. Both of her daughters will be young, so it'll be much different than the real Scream 7 we're going to get. But that is going to be coming to the podcast late summer, early fall, so please tune in for that. I need to thank everybody over at Patreon. Thank you to everybody who subscribes to the Patreon at any and every tier. I'm an independent entity, so any bit of support that comes into the Patreon goes back into the podcast. Joining the Patreon gets you ad-free and early access to every episode, as well as the opportunity to join the community of the show. We have group chats across social media. In particular, Instagram is really the hub of the podcast community. More importantly, joining the Patreon is the vessel in which you would use to come onto the podcast, either in a one-on-one situation with me or a small panel. In addition, there's a guaranteed invite every month to a big group Zoom recording about a Scream topic. An exciting feature of the podcast is the audio commentary episodes. Every Scream fan knows what it was like listening to Wes Craven do the audio commentaries for the original trilogy and Scream 4, with Marianne Maddalena and Kevin Williamson and Patrick Lussier. And what I'm trying to do for my Patreon subscribers is I am going to be performing an audio commentary of a Scream or a Scream-related movie, one per month, every month. And my goal is to try to approach these as I'm doing deep analytical analysis about the characters, about the themes, about just general reaction. So it's something that I'm really proud of and I hope continues to be a cherished part of the podcast. So the commentary is available as a normal podcast episode for anybody to listen to like they would any other podcast, but it will also be available as a video watch along. So everybody, please go over to Patreon, subscribe to Scream with RCS. I would be eternally grateful. So I need to go through and thank everybody over at Patreon who is subscribed as a stab investor or a daddy/mama Ghostface. So the daddy/mama Ghostface of the Patreon are Carrie Tenney, Brett Janovich, Corey Wilson, and Stevie Shears. The stab investors include Allie, Mark Karim, Tamika Jones, David D., Garrison Nichols, Gustavo Mora, Jess Mariano, Joey Nobarini, aka The Vault, Josh Calamari, Josh Carr, Scream Queens podcast, both Josh and Justine, The Horror Project podcast, Justin Weir, Kevin Abner, Mark Vieira, PWO5, aka Philip Douglas, Quentin Harrison, and Sam Levy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Oh, my goodness. I am sitting here with my good friend, Josh Reinhold. Hey, Josh.
Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm so good.
So, listener, you won't be hearing it this close, but so Josh and I are recording on the day of his previous episode. It's episode 224. It came out on June 10th, so today is June 10th. The Gale episode is going to be probably coming out 2 weeks after this. But so Josh and I are kind of like fresh off the buzz of that episode, and like it's a really important episode about like in terms of like kind of like pivoting to like the future of we're in the Scream 7 era. Like this year, within this calendar year, Scream 7 will be released. We all have seen it, probably talked about it on the podcast. It's just so cool. So Josh, congratulations on your episode. I think it's a fantastic episode. And like, for me, it was something that was really important. I mean, like we get the Taylor Swift song in the episode is Change. So it's literally about like a transition.
Thank you. Yeah, it got me really excited as I got towards the end, especially just like daydreaming about what could be on the horizon for Sydney and all the rest of the characters we love in the franchise.
Yeah. Well, you said something in the episode that wasn't even really a part of the main topic. It was a prelude that just kind of like it stuck with me in the moment. And every time I had listened, I listened to the episode released today at least 4 times in the editing process, and I laughed every single time. We were talking about Cat in the Hat and the box office threat, and Josh says, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I don't think Cat in the Hat's going to be that big of a deal. And it's just so funny the way you said it, because you didn't say it in like in a bitchy gay way. You just said it in like a conversational
Translation. I didn't say it the way I normally would,
but you didn't say it in like trying to make a moment. You were just talking. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I don't think Cat in the Hat's going to be a big deal. But to me, it's just like it's a meme. I don't want to speak for everybody, but because it's just very much like, it's very you and also very me. So I love that, because it's like sometimes we have to point out the obvious, despite toxic positivity bullshit. And we talked about that on the episode. But so Josh, I want to make this into a segment. So I don't want to speak for everybody, but I want to hear your thoughts on Final Destination Bloodlines, because you just saw it before we get going with the main topic today. So please
You're
tell me
just
what your
like
thoughts are.
lighting up my funeral pyre. So yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I don't understand. I think there's a little bit of just like a collective, I don't know, like everybody drank the same spiked Kool-Aid here. Look, I understand when you compare the film to some of the other installments, it gets points for trying. Guy gets points for creating a little bit more intricately woven plot and backstory, messing around with the past and the present. But number one, I thought that unfortunately the lead could not carry the film. I found her acting to be it felt like I was watching a showcase at a North Hollywood acting school where everything is so heightened. Like, everybody's getting beaten and fighting and like terrible things are happening. The reaction gifs were intense for me every time we were in close up on her face. And I also and look, this could just be like a preference thing, but I didn't find the film, I was kind of tired going in, and I remember I told my friend, at least this movie will wake me up and it'll be tense and I'll be on the edge of my seat. Because I get very stressed out in horror when I'm anticipating, a death blow. But I had the opposite experience. It was like every single death sequence was so ham-fistedly forecasted that by the time it was happening, I was just kind of, I will say I was laughing. So at least I was entertained, but just maybe not in the original way that they intended. But the last couple things I will say about this is that, it just really killed me that whoever's idea it was to design the grandmother's hideout. It looked like she was trying to survive Jurassic Park, not this destiny in which all it takes is a stiff breeze to knock something out of its place. She steps outside for 5 seconds and her entire protected thing she allegedly built without dying, something gets dislodged by a breeze and she's out. So I just thought that was hilarious. And then also just her book, and the fact that after studying the book for a day or two, her granddaughter, is it the granddaughter, or am I? Yes. Her granddaughter's reaction is to be walking down the street and see a sharp object hanging from a tree and be like, oh my God, you guys, thank God I got this information from grandma. That could hurt us. It's I was just what is happening?
Well, because I love your reaction, because it's so true. And I didn't really get that about the grandma's house, why she had all these really sharp, pointy, dangerous objects around the house. Because in Final Destination 2, Allie Larder is in a mental hospital, and she's in a cushioned room, that to me makes sense, right? Soft, but like being in a place that like literally has all these objects, right? And I get like she was trying to like have it so it's like wind chimes so she could spot any sense of the wind coming, but like I don't care. Like, but I agree with you about the lead actress. I thought she was, I thought she was weak. She couldn't carry the film. And the film itself, again, I think it's fine. I like the Bloodlines concept enough. And, for fans of the franchise, I get it, it's probably fun. But I just don't get I see it as a huge overreaction to the movie. I don't really understand what exactly it almost reminds me of Scream 6 when it came out. But Scream 6 I think is a better film than Final Destination Bloodlines. It just,
Totally.
like it just feels like so sensationalized and like everyone has to just love it because everyone wants to be part of the moment and just like, oh my God, this is so much fun. Like that is not that's not me. Like I want to be able to I want to be able to have an opinion about it, like and not just be part of the collective like Rotten Tomatoes 92% hype. Like that to me is wild. Like, I feel like we're living in the Twilight Zone.
Mhm. Yeah, this happens to me all the time, and so I'm very comfortable in this space of feeling like I'm the overly critical asshole and everyone else is just out here having a blast. But I feel like, what I laughed the other day thinking about this to myself because part of like the prism that I see movies through is how much time and money a movie got, and then like comparing it to experiences that I've had on set. And like, I was just thinking about it and I'm like, well, I guess like good for the people behind Final Destination that they've never had to sit across from a studio executive who's like, could death consider like heart attacks, strokes, and mall seizures, geoblastomas? Like, could we do this cheaper? Do we really need to knock an entire fucking building down in VFX, like in post? Whereas like I'm used to sitting across from someone who's like, can we just like cut this chase sequence? Like, can we just see her get shoved out the window or whatever, right? So, but yeah, like I think Final Destination's never really been like my style, and I recognize that. And I'm not hating on people that just like get a kick out of the whole mechanism. I didn't remember it being so forecasted. Like, it felt like every time we were approaching a death in this one, it was like we'd zoom in on like something shaking. And then it was like, and it's like, I don't know. I think it would have been a little bit more fun to just have those moments happen.
Right. No, it makes total sense. But no, I just wanted to make sure you got your 2 cents because you got your 2 cents about the box office for Scream 7. And like, I did an episode where I kind of like spoke for like a good 30 minutes about why, to me, the Rotten Tomatoes score doesn't really make sense, but also kind of like using Final Destination as like a launching pad to talk about Scream. So I kind of wanted you to have that like one last echo, and I really never want to talk about Final Destination Bloodlines ever again, but it is what it is. Okay,
Indeed.
Josh, we are here to talk about one of the queens of Scream. This is a very special episode. This is the Gale Weathers episode, and so this is one of the very, very first shows we're doing for season 5, and I think it's very appropriate because we don't know what is to come with Gale Weathers. After Scream 5, I thought a lot of people, I think, had a lot of hope because she was done well in Scream 5 in terms of giving that arc that you and I talked about in our previous episode, like from 1 to 4, justice and like recognition. And then Scream 5 seemed to honor it, and it gave her another arc, a smaller arc, but a very clear emotional A, B to C. And from there, we had so much potential with Scream 6, and then Scream 6 just let us down in terms of basically everything with Gale Weathers, from besides her big phone call and chase scene, but just in terms of her entire characterization was a huge letdown. Josh, like this episode, we're going to be talking about a couple of things, but like one thing that has dawned on me recently is like there is something about Gale Weathers in each of the movies that makes her very unique or very special or stands out as like something that like a hallmark of Gale in this movie. So I want to discuss like what makes Gale special in each of those 6 movies, but also kind of project like what could be her special quality in 7. And also, do we think she's going to make it out of 7 alive? Do we think she's going to carry on into this new trilogy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Because like I think that actually her going is more of a possibility than a lot of people are thinking right now. Do you agree with me that there's something about Gale in each of the movies that stands out as especially unique, or is this just a Ryan C. Showers thing?
Definitely agree with you. I think especially for anybody who loves these films and hasn't done, a very tight rewatch where not too much time passes from one film to the next. If you do that, you'll really see Gale's evolution. And I think the only way not to be extremely disappointed by what they did with Gale in 6 is to let too much time pass and kind of lose the thread, which is what it feels like the writers and directors did with Gale in 6. But yeah, absolutely. I think in each film, one could argue that Gale has the most character development of anyone in the Scream franchise. I mean, Sydney, just by nature of being the sort of like final girl prototype, and it's always kind of about her, and she's always in survival mode. They do an incredible job with Sydney, don't get me wrong, but Gale kind of has a bit more freedom as a character and their ability to write her, I think. So tracing her through each film is really fascinating and really fun.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like, this isn't a dig to Sydney. Like, Gale Weathers and Sydney Prescott coexist for a reason, right? Sydney is she's more of the traditional final girl, but just done to perfection. Whereas Gale Weathers, she is a final girl and a co-lead with Sydney a lot of the time, but she also there's a lot more creativity in terms of what you can do with Gale Weathers because she's not the main character where so much is riding on her. And like, for me, for this episode, what I meant by like what makes her special or the special quality about Gale in each of these movies, I'm thinking more about variety. And I think with Gale Weathers, you get a lot of variety from all 6 films. I look at Sydney in Scream 1 to 2 to 3, and like, yes, there's differences, but like, it's very cohesive. It feels very much a part of the whole. Whereas with Gale, like, I think Scream 1 Gale, very different to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. And I want to just kind of like acknowledge how I see what Gale's special quality in each of those, and then kind of project like, what will that be in Scream 7? Because like, there are a couple of routes Scream 7 could go, and this is kind of why this episode is necessary, I think, is because there's only 2 ways to go. Scream 7 could stick with the path of Scream 6 and kind of write Gale in a very like sitcom stock character type of a way where she just exists in this space now, and that's who she is. That's what we have to get used to. Or they could really take her back and bounce her back and have a redemption for the character on a quality perspective and like kind of get her back to where she was before. So Josh, do you want to go through them?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so in Scream 1, this is how I see what her special quality is, or what makes Gale Weathers stand out in Scream 1. I see Gale as like the breakout scene stealer of Scream 1. Like, I think this for Courtney in Scream 1, it was really about proving a point. Like, I can do this type of part. I can play an antagonist. I can play an unlikable person. I can play a bitch, for lack of a better phrase. And I can really act. And I'm not just playing the Monica Geller.
No, I completely agree with that take. I think that's undeniable. It's once, every several years, if we're lucky, that a character that iconic breaks out in some piece of pop culture. And I think undeniably, Gale Weathers was the breakout like star of the first Scream film. And not to take away, I'm not doing this in a comparative, like in any way, shape, or form to put down Sydney Prescott or Dewey or anyone. I mean, obviously Drew's opening scene was iconic, but in the wake of Scream coming out and its legacy, it's like, you can't go to Halloween in any major city and not see a gay and Gale Weathers Scream 1 drag. You know what I mean? Like, that character really just made a huge impact. And I think one of the things, the more I rewatch Scream in like our current context, in which we're just a lot more aware of all the different dynamics and all forms of media, I have a lot more sympathy and empathy for Gale and Scream when I watch it now. Right. She is cutthroat. She doesn't have great bedside manner when it comes to her approach with Sydney, but she is just staying true to what she believes, and she's right. So yeah.
Well, so can I ask though, and I guess we buried the lead here, but like, for me though, for all I just said about Gale Weathers and like Courteney Cox in Scream 1, Scream 1, Gale does not rank that high for me, like in terms of my Gale ranking. And I think it's like due to the fact that like Scream, the original film, it's like the supporting roles like Dewey, Gale, they are still very green. They're kind of on the more generic side compared to what happens in Scream 2. And I think part of what happens in Scream 2 with those two characters specifically and Sydney is what really makes Scream 2 and 3 the classics that they are in terms of transforming these characters from, serviceable, right, to I guess I should ask you before we keep going is what is your Gale Weathers ranking?
Okay, I'm gonna say my Gale Weathers ranking is 2. It's hard for me to choose between 3 and 4. I would say 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 6.
Okay, so Josh and I have the same ranking here, so we're just going to refer to this going forward as our ranking because, like, so as Taylor Swift once sang, like, there's a song on Speak Now. It's called Ours. So
Of course there is.
this song is ours, but our Gale ranking here for both me and Josh is Scream 2, Scream 3, Scream 4, Scream 5, Scream 1, and Scream 6 last. So Scream 1 ranks kind of like is second to last here. And so does that given that and given everything that we're saying, do you think that the Scream 1 ranking so low makes sense?
I think it does because let's remember, like this was always conceptualized as a trilogy. It's like when you're reading a novel and a lot of us have probably had this experience, like you kind of get through the first 75, 80 pages in which they really introduce the characters, the world, the stakes, and then the payoff begins in the back 2/3 of the novel, right? I kind of look at it that way, and I think that the foundation built in Scream 1 is so important, and without it, we couldn't have, what we get from Scream 2, 3, 4, and 5, and not 6. So, yeah.
It's like that meme, like you, not you, and you, right? So okay, so we have our special quality about Gale in Scream 1, which is that she's a breakout scene stealer, and there was Courteney Cox kind of like breaking a mold about herself and separating her from the Monica of it all. In Scream 2, what I've kind of deemed as her special quality and like what makes people, when people think of Gale in Scream 2, what do they think of? And for me, it is her character evolution from bad to good. Like we see this happen on screen where she's, shedding the black off, like she's wearing a white shirt at the end, but like we see her change who she is on the inside and her actions about like her career and like the humanity she identifies with in terms of the other characters and the fact that people keep dying. That is something that's what makes Gale Weathers famous, in my opinion, about the original trilogy, is this transformation from bad to good. In addition, it's her best look, and she is kind of escalated from being the supporting role in Scream 1 to co-lead with Sydney. I mean, she really becomes a co-lead in the third movie, but Scream 2 kind of has a plot A and plot B structure, and I think that's really cool. And like again, without this movie, like doing this for Dewey and Gale, I think that like so much of what we know about Scream wouldn't be. So Josh, what are your thoughts on Gale in Scream 2? Do you think that there's a different special quality here that I missed?
No, I agree with everything you said. One thing I did want to say about, I was like rewatching some key scenes this morning just to like prep, and anytime I'm like watching Gale and Scream 2, it's like that classic moment when as a gay man you're like, I would go straight for her. Like that's how I feel about Gale in Scream 2. I'm like, she's so sexy and the wig is wigging, like that wig really works for her. But no, everything you said, what I would add about Scream 2, which I think is really interesting, like I feel like Gale is slowly but surely being anchored throughout that film. It's like Dewey is a big piece of it because you see her actually watch what her book has done to someone she actually cares about and how it's made him feel. And you can really see Courtney's performance is so great in Scream 2. There's so much that's nonverbal when you go back and really look at Gale in that film. Choices that Courtney's making that are adding layers of depth that may not have just been there on the page. I really appreciate that. And the other thing is, Gale, I feel like Debbie Salt and the other reporters, it's like they're a mirror for Gale.
Yeah.
She's kind of seeing like herself in them and realizing that she's not sure she likes who she is. So
and because like to match that, like it's I think a big part of that is like the humanity of experiencing the murders in real
Yeah.
time with these people who are literally dropping, and especially like, so I don't, there's nothing bad or inherently evil about being a reporter. It's just more so the humanity aspect of Gale kind of rising up and kind of experiencing it differently and having more empathy and humanity for Sydney, Dewey, Randy. And then I think the big turning point, of course, is Randy's death. That is I feel bad, Dewey. I feel really, really bad. Like that is the scene of her original trilogy arc, in my opinion. So,
Yes.
and I mentioned the best look. This is her best look because it really is like what you just said about like, about her hair and like, the body. Even my mother one time, my mom and my sister and I were watching this years ago. And there's this shot of Courtney whenever she and Joel are talking like midway through about like the B-roll footage or establishing shots. And we see Courtney walking and, her figure looks amazing. And my mom looked at my sister and she's like, Abby, doesn't that motivate you?
God, Lord.
I know. So, okay. So we have our Gale special quality for Scream 2. Let's move on to Scream 3, because this is kind of like, this is a more controversial one. So Scream 3, what is her special quality? I believe that like, a lot of people would say that her special quality is just simply the Gale and Jennifer dynamic, right? And that is, it's the most memeable thing. It's what people are drawn to on social media because they are a fun duo. Seeing the real Gale and the fake Gale, side by side, that's fun and iconic. But for me, it goes even farther than that, because it's not just Jennifer. It's the love story with Dewey. It's the fact that she is kind of like the stable backbone of the movie, while Sydney is at her most dramatic and saddest in dealing with her emotions. And then you have like the comedy of like the Stab 3 cast. Gale is in the middle, grounding the movie and allowing the plot to go forward about Maureen Prescott. So I think there's that. I think that like she does really ground the movie as a co-lead with Nev, and of course Gale and Jennifer, the fun of that, the imagery of that, and the love story with Dewey. I think those are all of the things that really make Gale and define her in Scream 3. What are your thoughts?
Agree with all of that. And I would just add that I think Scream 3 really solidifies Sydney and Gale as friends. Two people that do deeply care about each other. And I would take that even further. I know I've said this to you before and potentially even on the podcast. When I rewatched Scream 3 this time around, I was really just struck by how driven Gale seems to protect Sydney. That's kind of new. In 2, yes, in the finale, but it's kind of been more of a we're in this together, let's get this done way. Right. I feel like in 3, it feels like for Gale, Dewey and Sydney are her family at this point. And she is deeply invested in the 3 of them surviving it together.
Yeah. And she's fully a hero too. Like, her motives, I think, are the purest of the 3 movies, of course. And that's, of course, the work that was done 1 to 2 and then 2 over 2 and then 2 to 3. The person we see in Scream 3 is not the same cutthroat, nasty bitch that she was in Scream 1. And that's kind of the point. So, I love all of that. And as it relates to Dewey and Sydney, agreed, 100%. So now from here, where do you go? So this is why the original trilogy was so great, because you have this beautiful arc for Gale that makes 100%, sense. It's closed. Sydney has a similar arc. And then we go into Scream 4, and it's kind of like, what do you do with her now? And, I think this was kind of influenced by the fact that, like, Courtney is a comedy queen, from her television work. And, like, in particular, at the time of Scream 4, she was doing Cougar Town. And I think that she brought a little of that zest and that energy to Scream 4. So what I would say is her special quality in Scream 4 is, like, I think that she is, like, the energy source of Scream 4. I think she's the comedic. I think she's the comedy. I think she is, like, the energy generator. Like, whenever she's on screen, the movie just feels more alive and more forward moving, more urgent, and it's because of like the zest that she brings to it, and it's the funniest we've ever seen her. And like, I think the fact that she's driving the mystery, in Scream 3 she's also, she's a part of the mystery too, and she's pushing it forward. But in Scream 4, she's literally, trying to break out of this funk of being like a housewife, for lack of a better phrase, and get back into her career. And she's really pushing forward, like, ooh, we need to do this, we're going to investigate here, we're going to go here, we're going to go do the stabathon, push. push. And that to me is why I think I think that Gale is special in Scream 4, but also it's interesting because it's the first time we've ever seen Gale unsure of her standing in the formula of Scream. Like there's almost something very insecure about her because Dewey kind of pushed her to the side. She's not the author. Sydney is. So I think a lot of that energy comes from insecurity, which I think is cool. But
Yeah.
I would say like the special quality is that the energy and the comedy. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think that the Gale that we leave behind in 3 is one who had the purest motivations, as you said before. I think the Gale that we meet in 4 is sort of lost at sea. And so it's, it's almost as if when all of it starts happening again, like her shoulders kind of drop because she's like, oh, like I have a purpose again, and so it's one of those weird things where it's almost like her motivations feel muddled. It's like somebody who's super into philanthropy, but when you really boil it down, it's because it makes them feel good, not because, and it's impossible to really get to the root of that. But I think with Gale and 4, there is this aspect that she's like kind of invigorated and excited that she has this purpose again because of where we find her life to be as the murders kick off. And I think that, in my opinion, like Gale and Dewey's arc in 4 or story in 4 is kind of the richest element of the film. I don't know why, and I know people are gonna disagree with me on this, but I'm not as invested in like the Sydney stuff in 4. I feel like something about the aunt and cousin that we've like never really heard of and like never encountered in any of these movies before just felt sort of like shoehorned in. And I don't know that like they fully pulled it off for me in a way that felt like I got emotionally invested and whatever. It was like, I feel like I flip out every time they stab the woman from Battlestar Galactica in the back just because I loved her character on that. And so it makes me sad. But I'm not like connected to her by that point, other than that actress is someone you naturally want to root for. So great casting in that sense. But anyway, Gale and Dewey, it's just really interesting, right? Because we all stan Gale and Dewey. I think we all believe that they, at their best were a great match for one another. And even in the best relationships, sometimes one person fails the other. And the fact that Dewey would shut Gale out of the investigation basically because he's worried what other people in, the precinct or the town are going to say is super disappointing. And so you do feel for Gale. You're like, what? Like, but without Gale, we wouldn't even have a Scream 4 because everyone would probably be dead, So yeah, just like really great shit. Like you said, so funny. Like, by the way, your lemon squares taste like ass. Like, love that line. Just iconic moments. And she also looks really great in 4, I will say. Yeah.
I've watched Scream 4 with dozens of people over the years. And every single time it's the scene with Rebecca, and she comes out and she's walking and her hair is flowing and, her body is, is perfect. I mean, like every single time, whether I'm with a gay man, a straight man, a woman, a gay or straight woman, anybody, like any spectrum, everyone says, "Ooh, damn, she looks great." And I mean, it's so true. I mean, she's like a superstar. But no, I agree with you. And like the thing is, like, I've always been somebody who thinks Gale is more interesting than Sydney in Scream 4 in general. She just has so much more going on, and it just feels like urgent. Whereas with Sydney, the point of her in Scream 4 is to almost be at a plateau place. So I think that everything that you said there makes a lot of sense. But it's just, again, so interesting because these first 4 movies, they are so different from each other. There's nothing repetitive in this at all in terms of like, the Gale in Scream 4 it doesn't resemble any of the first 3 in any way.
No,
and that's what makes
always
it so cool.
like, yeah, and it's always like grounded in story. Like the way that Gale evolves, like always makes sense, and they can accomplish it in very little time. And I guess this is why, like, and we'll get there, but like people who defend the choices made for Gale in 6, I'm like, no, that's bullshit because all they had to do was show us Gale try to type out a sentence and write, "I don't fucking know," or whatever, what to write. Yep. That let us know everything we needed to know. Like, Gale has writer's block. Then, like, a quick moment of her being, like, shut out of the investigation. Like, these are, like, less than 20 seconds of screen time, and we have like a rich backdrop for where
Yep.
Gale is at that explains the way she's going to move through the film. They
Yep.
could have easily accomplished that in 6, you know.
Hmm.
If they wanted to go with like Gale has fully regressed, which would have pissed me off, but if they earned it, I would have been like, yeah, not the choice I would have made, but okay, you know.
Yeah. And you're so right about that. Like those little moments, like even just like the way that she walks into the bookstore and she's somewhat jealous of Sydney. Like,
Mhm.
if Radio Silence were directing it, I guess that would have been chopped because I don't know, but but little moments like that inform the greater picture. So when we get to that moment in the police station when she and Dewey are going at it, it hurts. We hurt for Gale whenever Dewey kind of shuts her out. It's because we saw
Yeah.
her watching the interview with Nancy O'Dell. We saw her at the keyboard. We saw her kind of jealous of Sydney at the bookstore.
Right.
Yeah.
They're relatable, right? Like that's what, because Gail like begins her journey in this franchise as like this heightened borderline caricature of a person. And then they like ground her more and more with each film. You know, everyone on earth has experienced a moment in their life when somebody they love or somebody close to them accomplishes something, gets some kind of accolade, and they're very happy for that person, but they're
Mhm.
also jealous, and grappling with those mixed feelings and figuring out what it means about you and how to potentially let go of that kind of jealousy. Like that's a universal thing. And
Right.
so that's like the kind of stuff I feel like they are doing in 4 with Gail, and why it really hits home.
Well, so then we go to Scream 5, and again, something we've never truly seen before. We saw it a little bit in Scream 2 in terms of like the way that she kind of mourns Dewey in the sound booth, or somewhat mourns him. But there's something it's much different in Scream 5. With Scream 5, because she's so localized to just the second half, there is a small arc, but it's very very clean, clear, and concise. And basically, the thing that makes Gale special in Scream 5 and what people can go to when they think of Gale in Scream 5, it's this arc of reuniting with Dewey after divorcing, then losing him after his death, and then getting to avenge that death, but by shooting Amber and by teaming up with Sydney and going out and finishing the job, and kind of having revenge for him, but also just like satisfying that need in herself to stop the killing, but also somewhat get revenge for Dewey's death. I think like that, A to B to C is so clear and so perfect, and I think they pulled it off so well. And it's something, again, we've never really seen Gale this vulnerable, this emotional, and I think that was so great that it allowed Courteney Cox to have those moments. And I wish that a part of me wishes they would have gone further. I think if this were like if Sydney were the main character in Scream 5, right? I think we would have had double the impact, double the screen time of Gale's mourning of Dewey and like her emotions about getting to that point where she gets to shoot Amber. So, but I love Gale in Scream 5, and I just think, again, like for me, the person we meet in Scream 5, I see her as the evolutioned Gale from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. It's all there. Even like the fact that she's so comedic in Scream 4, I still see that Gale when we first meet her with Sam. Like she's still there. So that's what I think really makes Gale special about Scream 5 is this emotional arc with Dewey. So what are your thoughts, Josh?
Yeah, agreed. I think they did a really great job in 5 of it's almost like toning Gale down a little in terms of the kind of comedy we get from her dialogue. And that feels real and believable to me because of all of the time that has passed. Like Gail is so many years older than when we first met her, and honestly, so many years older than when we last saw her. People change a lot. Still very much Gail. It still pops out in her, like, you know how they say don't fuck with the original? Well, this is the original. Like she's still herself, but she's an evolved, matured, like more empathetic version of herself. Like I really enjoy her first encounter with Sam because she brings a
Mhm.
lot of heart into that interaction and concern for a stranger that Gail, I mean, think about it. Like, have we ever seen Gail approach someone who's just experienced trauma with that kind of warmth who's a stranger before? Probably not.
No, absolutely. And I love that scene too. And a lot of people don't like that as an introduction for her. I mean, like, it's hard to deny just the filmmaking of that scene where we see her first, her legs, and then the pantsuit, and then the long black hair. We know who that is. And then we see the camera pan and it reveals her face. And it's just like, oh my God, like that is how you do it. Like, I give Radio Silence 1000% props with that. Like, that, I think that's my favorite reintroduction of any of the characters of the trio in 5. And you're right though about the heart and like the compassion that she shows. Like the Gale of Scream 1 and 2 would never have done that. Ever.
Right. There'd be a microphone in Sam's fate. Well, it would be like in 6, right?
Right.
But it's like, yeah, like that. And that's like the other thing. I'm like, go back and watch your own fucking film. Like, she didn't know these people in 5 and she was kinder to them than you're having her be in 6. Like, this is insane. Anyway. Yeah.
Well, so that is her special quality in 5, and like to round it out here, and we don't need to like bag on 6 entirely, but like it is about like so the special thing that people look to in Scream 6. And I think it's kind of like it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's her big phone call and chase scene, which it is, for me, it's the best part of the movie. It's the one part of the movie that like I mean, I also like the shrine, but like it's like the one part of the movie where I feel like, oh, this is Scream. Like I'm in it. It's not a perfect scene. I still have some notes, some minor notes, but that is what people go to because, Gale never had a proper phone call before. So people, when they think of Gale on Scream 6, you're going to think of the phone call. You're going to think of that apartment sequence and how great it is, the cool action and and the way that Gale fights back and how sassy she is on the phone. Like that is the magic of Gale in Scream 6. And sadly, there isn't much else to Gale in Scream 6 that in terms of just substance, but also the substance that we do get, isn't very good, other than perhaps like just like the nice conversation she has with Sam that is too short in the shrine. But like, so for Scream 6, it's pretty obvious that when people think of 6, they think of her phone call and her chase scene. And I think like, so the one thing I don't like is people who say, oh, well, because the phone call and chase scene are great, that means 6 is one of Gale's best appearances. Like I hate that argument. Josh, what are your thoughts here?
I fully agree. I mean, I'm not bagging on 6 like overall in this conversation. Like, I encourage people to remember that we're talking about Gale Weathers in each film. I am more of a fan of 6 than Ryan.
I am.
Yeah, and but I have like I am a fan with probably like a 10-page document of things that I would change. So, like, to be clear. But no, yeah, like, look, even in our like really fun Instagram Patreon chat, which I super enjoy, plug to anyone who is on the fence about becoming a Patreon, you should, because it's really fun.
Thank you.
But, like I've had people defend Gale in 6 to me in there, and I don't want to in any way, I don't want to speak for everyone. No, I don't want to dismiss them outright, but I do feel like kind of pointing to ways in which Gale moved in the past as justification for the Gale that we meet in 6, that just isn't enough for me personally as a fan and as someone who's like paid close attention to the evolution of Gale throughout these films. When the love of her life gets fucking murdered, and she, and she goes through this like awful, traumatic, more personal than ever experience with Ghostface. At the end of that, and at the end of 5 says, I'm not writing these fucking books anymore. Fuck these killers. Like, I want to write a book about Dewey. And it's like, to just abandon that and then not really dig into it, like, give us nothing. Not even a moment where Gale is like says something to Sydney with full of regret, where she's like, I should have written that book about Dewey instead. Like, I just couldn't. It was too hard. I couldn't, like, the more I sat down and tried to write about him, it was just sending me deeper and deeper into the depths of depression. Like, again, I still wouldn't have loved the arc for Gale, but it would have at least given it substance. And they just didn't do it at all. And again, it's like pointing out, you will know this better than me, but the time span, Tara, says it's like been a year, right? Year and a half,
Mhm.
whatever. Because she
Yeah.
says a year ago, like, I'm not going to let my life be controlled by something that happened to us for 2 days a year ago or whatever. And it's like, how are we in a universe where they all like find their way to New York? Well, Gail's already there, but then the sisters end up in New York. They clearly have had to have had some type of relationship with Gail for some period of time to know where she fucking lives, by the time you were in the park and the phone call happens. And it's like, I can't make, like, you can't really convince me of that. Like, I don't understand it because, like, also the logistics of a book being written, coming out, the sisters, like, it feels so haphazard.
Yep.
And
And we never even get to see the cover of the book. And like, again, I think anybody who watched Scream 2 or half watched Scream 2, even if like you are playing on your phone for 90% of watching Scream 2, you could at least pick out and tell me what Gale Weathers' book looks like in that movie because it's so prominent. But I literally wrote on my little note just now, I said, I'm not convinced, when people tried to defend Gale in Scream 6 in any way about like, oh, well, she regressed or no, she's back to being her sassy, fun self. Like, no, I mean, like, that's not who she is. Maybe that's who she was back then, but that's not who she is today or like post Dewey. And like, you're right. Like, you said to them, like you said like a couple minutes ago, Radio Silence, watch your own movie. Like, watch your own movie. They don't even address the fact that like where we end Gale on in Scream 5 never gets brought up in this about like the book about Dewey. Even just like there are some like little hints to Dewey here and there, but there's never actually an addressing of the fact that Gale said, I will never write a book about this. I'm going to write about Dewey. Like, and again, that fits perfectly with the Gale we knew from 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
And then for them to do this, like they just treated her like she was a stock character, like in a comedy that never changes, and like a television comedy. I mean, like that you bring in to get the same beat in episode 2 to episode 6 to episode 11. That same recurring character. That's how they treated her, as opposed to treating her with the respect and dignity of a character that we grew with.
Gotta like earn it, like.
And explain
it. Yeah, like the example I gave, another could just be like her publisher rejected the book about Dewey. Like they wanted what Gale delivers, like, or, it was like I was saying before, like, she had an extreme writer's block. Like it hadn't been this bad since when she was unhappy in Woodsboro. And, a couple weeks before her final deadline, like she just banged out what she can do in her sleep, which was like a, documentation of the events of 5. And there's just, and if they had done that, and if they had showed us Gale acknowledging her own disappointment in herself, then that actually would have been stomachable because, again, it would have been relatable. We've all done something like that in our lives where we set out to do something one way and then we revert back to old ways and feel some version of self-loathing as a result. And it would have been a really cool scene between her and Sydney because I think Sydney has always been very good about having a lot of empathy and patience for Gale, but also kind of holding her accountable, So that could have been really cool to see in 6. Well, I guess not because Sydney wasn't in 6. Sorry.
But had Sydney been in it, but like still, I get what you're saying. This is why Sydney probably should have been there to give Gale more of that dimension. I think that like a proper use of Sydney would have been like where Gale is with the core 4 in Scream 4 and she's more integrated to their storyline. And then like, some Sydney comes in kind of towards the end after we've seen Gale in action, however self-destructive that may have been, and Sydney to come in and hold her hand, be there for her, but call her out. And I think that's what that's what was missing, among other things, in Scream 6. Okay, so we've described what makes Gale special in each of the 6 movies so far, and now we get to move on to Scream 7 and kind of project for the rest of the episode about what is to come. So, Josh, if you had to take a guess, what would you say her special quality could be in Scream 7? And it's impossible to make a prediction here, but it's more so just kind of like, what would you like to see as her special quality? Because there's many different avenues you could go down. You could talk about, some ideas are what you've already suggested about Tatum, like her relationship there. Perhaps she is having a full-on redemption arc. Maybe we get to see the grief and trauma from Dewey that we didn't get to see in Scream 6 about his death. Maybe it's this like, Mark Consuelos guy, who apparently is going to be having scenes with her. He's also a reporter. Maybe there's going to be some kind of dynamic there about her career. So I mean, there's a lot of avenues that they could go down with Gale and Scream 7, and I just hope that Kevin actually commits to it and gives us a Gale Weathers we deserve, and not just rely on like the stock character quality that we saw in Scream 6. Like that is my biggest fear. So Josh, what are your thoughts here?
I agree 100%. I can't imagine a universe where Kevin continues on with the way that Gale was used in 6. I mean, I think that nowadays it's impossible for everyone involved in the film not to be aware of fan responses.
Yeah.
This has been a pretty loud one. And it would just be silly. And I don't know why Courtney would agree to come back. I don't think that Nev would stand by it. I think that if,
Well,
once Nev gets involved, I think she's going to be probably advocate for Courtney and be like, I don't want to do this if we're not giving her something real to do here.
Well, can I just ask a follow-up question? Do you think that was the fact that Courtney Cox, it took her so long to sign back on? She was not one of the first people to sign on, even if she was involved in discussions. She was one of I would say she was the middle to last in terms of the announcements, the formal announcements. Do you think that is probably partly why, like, Courtney didn't? So it's actually been stated that she didn't read the script for Scream 6 before she signed on. She was just like happy to be there. Do you think that there was something about what you just said in relation to Courtney signing on to 7?
I do. I can't imagine that there wasn't. And look, a lot of this just sounds so harsh, and I don't want to say, like, I love Courtney Cox. I think she's incredible. I think she's like one of the best things about the franchise. And I think when they underutilize her, it's to the detriment of the film, as proved by Scream 6. So yeah, signing on before reading the script, being an extremely busy person with a full life, millions of things going on. I could imagine a universe in which she was a little bit blindsided and was just like, this is what we're doing? Okay. Um, yeah, like I've been involved in projects where somebody is like soft attached in talks, and there's just that like caveat of deliver me a draft, prove that this is worth my time. So I kind of hope that that is the position that she took. And I'm sure that she had faith. I'm sure all of it was done in good faith. I'm sure that she believed in Kevin and Nev and had every intention of doing it, but maybe this time was like, I want to know what I'm signing up for. I want to see it and believe in it before I say yes.
And I'm sure she was probably, I'm just taking a guess, and I could be wrong. This is just us shit talking, but like, I just think that like she was probably sold Scream 6 as like, we want to give you a big scene. We want you to have like this big moment because you've never had a phone call. We want to give you that. And she was like, oh, sure, great, And since 5 was so well written in terms of her character, I could see why she was so eager, But I do think that she was probably I think she put the pedal to the metal a bit, because like when you think of Courtney Cox, you think of fun, comedy Monica, the little funny Instagram videos she makes. You don't think of like a hard ass businesswoman. But I think she probably did hold their feet to the fire and kind of really demanded that Gale be given something significant to do, and more respect than
Yes.
she was probably given throughout.
Totally.
So
I agree. So what I would say is that I think what you were saying about redemption, I find it hard to believe that they don't embrace that journey. The fact that, David Arquette is appearing in this film in some way, shape, or form kind of hints to me that they do actually want to process Dewey's death like through the eyes of Gale somehow, and maybe that's like a real ass moment between her and Sydney where, Gale, one of the ways to fix the crimes of 6 is to have Gale actually speak them out loud, which is very Scream and meta.
yeah.
And to have Sydney be like, well, like, Gale, like, don't you see, like, you're just running from Dewey's death, like, have you processed this? Like, trust me, you have to. Sydney understands more than anybody about that. So there's a lot of ways they could do that. I also like my fantasy Gale in 7 is a Gale that's realizing that like Sydney literally is her family. Everything she
Yeah.
said to Sam in 6, like she's putting into practice in 7. She's like, I'd even be down for like Gale quit her job. She no, that's too much. Like she would never fucking move to Iowa. What is it, Indiana or Iowa? Either
Indiana.
way,
Yeah.
gross.
But
Like, what are you doing, Sydney? Girl.
but but I would love a world where Gale does kind of retire near Sydney or like somewhere close to her, so she could be a part of her life in a real way, in a friend way, in a part of like the girl's life. I think that would be something cute, that to
Yes.
see.
And to keep
Um,
it true to Gale, she just like buys a house like in Sydney's neighborhood, but only comes for like holidays because she's like, sorry, like you get 2 days of my time in this fucking no man's land, and then I need to go back to civilization.
Well, so here's what I think in terms of what could be her special thing in 7. So, I mean, like, a lot of what we're already talking about, like, I think that absolutely dealing with Dewey's death and like a redemption for writing the book in Scream 6, that's on the table. Like, that has to be there. And like, she's never technically had like a true like redemption in terms of being like, I'm really sorry for what I did, or at least, so I think there's going to be that. I think that there is going to be something about her career. Like, the rumor mill is that like there's going to be like a cancel culture type reaction to her in some respect, which I think would be interesting. I think that like in addition to all that though, I think like how she operates within Sydney's life is going to be interesting, whether it's with the daughters, with Sydney herself. I can see Sydney and Gale having a lot of scenes here. Like I could see them having like, Gale being like Sydney's scene partner in the way that Tatum was in Act 2 of Scream 1, the way that they're kind of just together in most of the scenes. I could
Yeah.
see that happening.
Yeah.
So I think all of those things are on the table. I think that like we'll see a little bit of funny Gale, but I think it's also going to be, I think it's going to be a powerful movie for her. I think there's going to be a lot for her to do
Yeah.
in terms of the drama. And I just hope that like Courtney had enough shooting days to really make the impact that we want, and to really make up for Scream 6. I think like if they don't make up for Scream 6, people will be disappointed. So whatever it's going to be with Gale, I think that we need to they have the problem of fixing the past, but also making up for it and pushing forward just a little bit. So
The cancel culture, though, I'm just so not interested in it because I don't like when things that happen in the Scream universe don't feel rooted in reality. I mean, I can't really think of an example of something that's happened in the culture where we've like turned on true crime writers. Like we're all still
right.
gobbling that shit up with like no same.
Dahmer?
Yes.
Was
Like,
it
think about
him?
how
Yeah.
well Dahmer did, and, like, to me, it was, like, morally corrupt bullshit. It was, like an attempt to humanize a disgusting man. They're like, "Oh, but his parents fought sometimes, and they drank," and it's like, I don't care, Like, to me, like, if we're I don't think society has progressed to the point where we're actually self-reflecting about how we consume true crime, murder, docuseries, books, and documentaries. Like, we're not there yet. We're all still eating it up like pigs and shit. And I just don't think we've gotten to a place where, like, Gale being canceled for writing about the Woodsboro murders and, now the random New York City murders. Like, I just don't see it. I just don't see it because I don't
Yeah.
know what about what Gale is doing is so wrong.
Right. And I would love to know. I mean, I assume that there's going to be other things that happen in the movie that if this is a plot, it's not going to be just like out of the blue. But maybe Guy Busick wrote the first draft, so who knows? Teasing. So, but regardless, I think that there's a lot to do here. There's going to be a tremendous amount for Gale to be explored, and I think that like again, Kevin, you better get to work here. Okay. But a big question with us is what happens to her in Scream 7? Like, is it possible that she does in fact die? And you and I had a really intense conversation a couple of weeks ago about this. Like the real chance, like I actually think that it's a 50-50 chance just because like Kevin is going to want to have a big move, but also like a part of me feels like just because I know Guy Busick and listening to the podcast from the other day with Anthony, where we talked about Guy Busick's interview about Final Destination, he talked about his characters and how sad he was that he couldn't finish them, blah, blah, blah. I just feel like he's not going to kill a Chad and Mindy. So either like, we could either get a movie where everybody survives or Gale Weathers is the one to go. And Chad and Mindy are left on ice. I don't know. I just feel like I think that a big thing with Scream 7 is going to be is like you have Sydney, who is the main character, and then you have Mark, her husband, and and Gale, this person she survived all these things with, someone who's very significant to her. And I feel like one of Gale Weathers or Mark has to go. You could either Gale is going to die and Mark survives, which would give Sydney some kind of happy ending with her family, or you have Mark who dies, who is Sydney's husband, Tatum's dad, very significant for the plot, and Gale stays alive. I don't see a world where both of them go. Maybe maybe everybody survives. Maybe this is like Scream 6 again. But I don't know. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I agree. I feel like either Mark or Gale are going. How they do it, there's so many myriads of ways. Gale could be an opening kill. Gale could be a final kill as a sacrifice for, Sydney to have her family. And that, I mean, it feels like it would be so cheesy, but like that could be where Dewey comes in, like as Gale is going. So, I could see that for sure. I could also see the way I see it is like if you kill Gale, at least Sydney has her family.
Yes.
If you kill Mark, part two,
At least she has Gale.
then at least she has Gale. And in a weird way, it's like scarier for me for Sydney to like survive in a world without Gale. Because I feel like that leaves Sydney the most vulnerable. Like Gale's her sort of partner in crime and the only person that has really been through all of this with Sydney. So yeah, I don't know about the notion that Chad and Mindy are like guaranteed to survive because Guy wrote the draft. I mean, that's a pretty easy thing to change if he did write it with that end goal in mind. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think it's highly unlikely that they kill one of Sydney's daughters because killing kids in movies is really, really brutal and audiences don't like it. And studios are very afraid of things that audiences really don't like. I I kind of doubt that happens. And if it does, it would certainly be Tatum. But I feel like, as we discussed in the last episode I did with you, I kind of have this feeling like Tatum is going to be here to stay. So, and that would leave like younger girls. And I don't see that. I don't see it at all. So, yeah.
Can we just put a fine point on this, which is like, so if Josh and I are right that like one of them has to go in terms of Gale or Mark. So either Sydney and Gale survive together, Mark dies, Sydney loses her husband, which of course is a huge traumatic thing for her, and it would affect Tatum. So I actually think, if I'm taking a guess, I think Mark is going to be the one to go in that respect because it affects Sydney and Tatum and kind of starts a new storyline that could go where both of them have this trauma. So you have that, and Sydney and Gale continue to go on this journey together. But like where you said, let's just say Gale is the one to die, Mark survives with Sydney, and their family unit stays intact. I think that also makes sense because it doesn't leave Sydney hanging. Like either way, she'll be fine. I think if she has Gale, she's fine. If she has Mark and her family units intact, great. And Gale would be the one to go. And if this is a big movie for Gale in terms of a redemption arc for her, maybe it does make sense for her to go or to be killed in a movie where they're addressing all of these things about her and having a big like crescendo finale for the character. I could see a world where that happens. However, I think like what you said about Sydney existing in a world without Gale, for me, if they do a trilogy, I think that it makes more sense for Gale to die in the middle part and leave Sydney with that void for the last chapter. I think that, to me, that naturally makes sense where Sydney will feel really, really alone. And it will make things scary, kind of how it was for her in Scream 3, how isolated she was, how traumatized she was. And like, I think that if you're going to kill Gale Weathers, it has to be big. It has to be amazing. It has to be sensational. But I think like the right time to do it is in the middle chapter of this new trilogy. Or even if they could both survive and kill Mark in that middle chapter, which would then lead into a Scream 9. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. Part of me wonders, and maybe you know this, I kind of wonder if they shot 6, like if they got that line about like there's a weak pulse and then the other line about her being in the hospital. I kind of wonder if they also like tried a version where that was Gale's death and tested both, and audiences were like, don't fucking kill Gale Weathers. Like part of me thinks, like, I just have this bizarre feeling because it's like to harken back, it's like that chase sequence was incredible. It's one of the most memorable, honestly, of the franchise. And it was like the most sort of high octane, edge of your seat aspect of Scream 6. And that would have actually felt like a way for Gail to go. And even, her saying, tell Sydney, I didn't let him win or whatever she said. And so, like, in a way, I don't really like, I think the only way to one up that is to have like Gail sacrifice herself, which I can 100% see happen. I also like had this bizarre thought while you were talking, which was like, what if Sydney's put in a position where she has to choose between Mark and Gail and she chooses Gail?
Oh my God. Oh my God. I think it could be natural. And I think that if it were done, it would be done in a way where like, we understand it. Like it's conveyed, like, emotionally. But like, I think that, so going back to what you said about 6, Radio Silence will say, oh, we never intended to kill Gail. But it's hard to argue with the way it was shot, in terms of like how she's survived. The different takes you could have gone, like you could have had like a version of that scene and the scene that follows, because everything is very vague in the scene that follows. You could have had the paramedic just say, oh, there's no pulse, and we just end, and then we go to the next scene, Sam and everyone's crying, and we take out Danny's line at the end, boom, we're done. So there's that. But like, so in terms of Gail sacrificing herself, we talked about this idea of like a cliffhanger. So I just feel like if Gail were to go, an interesting thing they could do is like almost like if they are going to commit to an 8 and a 9 and they want to kill Gail, a way to do it would be she could kind of like die like Judy Greer does in Halloween Kills, which is like the movie kind of is wrapped up, they think Michael Myers is dead, whatever, and then she's killed at the very, very last scene, and it's big, it's epic, and it's a big operatic moment that would then lead into Scream 9 and basically give everybody the sense things are not over, right? I like that idea, potentially. I do think that Courtney, if I had to take my guess though, I think Courtney wants to be involved through the end. So I honestly, if they decide to kill Gail, my overall preference would be to do it in the final movie, just as a way to be like, it's also kind of emblematic. Like if you kill Gail, you kill the source of the reporting and the documentarian of these murders. So when you stop talking about something, it goes away in a way. So I think that there could almost be something symbolic about her death in the final chapter of this saga. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I also just don't know. It's like, I don't know how important it is that like a Sydney or a Gale die. That's what makes Scream special, is that
Yes.
these women always, survive, and they're so much smarter than anyone that puts that mask on, and I think that actually is believable, and people who don't think it is are missing the point. I mean, look at the fucking idiots that unveil themselves at the end of all of these movies. Like, no wonder they can't, like, they lose against a potted plant every time. Like they have no peripheral vision, horrible choice of mask. Like they're tripping, they're falling. It's like, but they're committed to this like kind of fool's errand, and Sydney and Gail, they're fucking pros at this point. So yeah, like, would it be emotional and devastating and everything? And could they do it beautifully? And would I be sad, but also respect it? Sure. But I also just like really wouldn't be mad at, a world where like Sydney, her daughters, and Gail like remain standing at the end of whether this is 1, 2, or 3 movies. I'd be at peace with that too. I don't feel like I need Gail to die for these movies to have like an emotional core.
Yeah. No, I agree. And like that is where I would fall. If I had to give my preference, like I would say let Gail and Sydney live through the trilogy. Like that's what I would prefer. So, I mean, but I'm more open to Gail dying than I am to Sydney dying, for obvious reasons. I mean, Sydney's the main character. So, but you're right though. I mean, logistically, they're so trained almost as soldiers by this point, right? That it would be weird for them to die, knowing just how smart and slick and all knowing they are about being put in these situations, and how they can usually wiggle themselves out of it no matter what.
Yeah.
But so Josh, any final thoughts here about anything we talked about in terms of any of her special qualities, projecting for Scream 7, or talking about her fate, whether she lives or dies in this movie or in 8 or 9?
I'm just like really excited for more Gale Weathers, and I hope it feels like more of a return to normal than what we got the last time we saw her. Um, Courtney's so good in the role, and she just has such a way of adding layers of depth to moments that might otherwise not have them. I mean, it's like everything that you don't get in other horror movies with lesser actors. So it's like if you have somebody like that, use them, and so I really really hope that they put more on the page to support what she can bring. It's really hard for me to believe that that's not going to be the case with the team in place, with Kevin, with Nev, and with Courtney. That just feels like the ultimate safe space for Courtney to voice concerns and be like, and the fact that, she kind of fought to have David come back, like that's also a good sign because that feels like she was going like, what the fuck? Like, why did my character not even really acknowledge other than like an insert shot of a photo, like you know what I mean? It's like I mean she has the moment
In the
in the
shrine.
shrine. But again, it's just
Yeah.
like none of it was enough. Yeah. So I have a lot of faith. I want to laugh out loud for sure, but I also would love to have like moments where I get choked up. And I think that there's so much for them to play with based on the decades of work relationship that she and Sydney have, and this is like a big reunion moment, and I hope the trailer like leans into Gale and Sydney like back together,
Yeah. Well, I hope the movie itself leans into that because, like, I feel like if you would ask Radio Silence, they would say, "Oh, well, we did that with Scream 5." Like, you kind of did, but not really. I mean, like, they had some scenes like that, but I want more. I want it to be fully formed and fully developed and like juiced for all of its potential. Regardless, like, it's so fun to not know what's coming for Gale Weathers because like there's so many places you can go with it and so many ways to execute whatever ideas they have. So I think that like it is important to bring the comedy that we know about Gale Weathers and like the zingers and the bitchiness, but also bring back her humanity and a full complete arc where it feels like there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and she feels different and unique because that is what Gale Weathers has always been, besides Scream 6, and that's what she should continue to be. And, I just think that her place in the franchise, I hope she doesn't die because, her place in the franchise is so irreplaceable, and that bond between Sydney and Gale, there's so much to do with Gale that isn't just dependent on, a big chase scene. So I hope that she gets the Sydney time. I hope that there's something that defines her in the way that Gale was defined in each of those first 5 movies. And I hope that it's a real complete vision of where Gale is that makes sense with the woman we used to know. So,
amen.
Yeah. Amen. So, Josh, thank you so much for your time and for all of your insights about Gale. Where can they find you online?
Instagram at Josh G. Reinhold.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for your contributions to the podcast. And your voice is really important, especially because, like, again, you don't lean into the bullshit. We can talk about real things without worrying about precious feelings getting hurt. And you're very smart. Like, you are so awesome. I'm so grateful that you were a fan of the podcast to become a Patreon and that you liked me enough within the Patreon to want to become friends with me. So thank you so much for everything, Josh.
Oh, and right back at you. I have so much fun. I'm like, it's been really such a joy to like get closer to you and several people who I've met through the Patreon. Now, I have like so many like interesting deep conversations with that go far beyond Scream. So it's a really cool community, and it's a lot of fun to be a part of it.
Thank you for joining me for the Taylor Swift Song of the Day. Picking a song for Gale is so funny because like this is like the second big Gale episode we've done this year. And it's the second song we've picked from Lover. I never would have thought Gale Weathers was a Lover girl, but it is what it is. So everybody, please welcome my friend Ashley. Hey, Ash.
Oh, hello. How are you?
I'm well. How about you?
I am good. I am excited to chat.
Are you though? Because I was wondering, like, this is not like an Ashley song.
No, I like this song.
What is the song?
Yeah, that's true. Maybe we should tell people. This song is Afterglow. This is track 15 on Lover. But this song came out in 2019. It was produced by Ging, Lewis Bell, Taylor Swift, and Jack. I think Jack was on this too. And then also was written with all of those people plus Matthew Tavares. But I love this song it's like a really beautiful way of like explaining like, your misguidedness and taking accountability possibly in a fight that you have with like a partner that you truly care about.
Yeah.
Like not a silly fight, like
A real fight.
my partner and I got into a real zinger and I was an asshole, and this is almost like an apology for that.
So you and I see it a bit differently. I almost see this as like, we've talked about Lover with Cornelia Street and Cruel Summer, and how it's kind of an album about anxiety and about insecurity. Like you're in a new relationship and you love it, but you're insecure about it. And I see this as like almost like the peak insecurity, the peak moment of anxiety on the album. And I see it, I think that it definitely could apply to situations like where you describe where there's a really big fight and you were in the wrong and like your demons messed with you and kind of messed up a situation. But for me, I see Afterglow as like almost like a desperation, like to fix something, or like if whenever your partner gives you the silent treatment and you may or may not have done something to deserve it, but like you're so desperate for them to talk to you again and just desperate to make it go away and desperate for whatever forgiveness you do or don't deserve. And it's something that I definitely identify with. Like I definitely go into the Afterglow when it comes to wanting people to forgive me for something that I've done, as opposed to letting the situation sit for a second. And it also just makes me think about what her relationship like was with Joe Alwyn when she wrote this. And when you look at that plus Cornelia Street plus Cruel Summer all as one thing, it gives me a picture of Taylor that makes me kind of sad, and a picture of Taylor that I also see myself in terms of being kind of insecure about something and being desperate to apologize. So I don't know. What are your thoughts, Ash?
No, I completely agree. I definitely I think one of the reasons why Lover doesn't connect with me as much is because maybe sometimes I understand it too much and I just am like, nope, I don't want to. And because I don't know. I just like anything that like makes me feel like she's anxious, and I'm like, oh, I don't like this feeling, because it totally understand anxiety. And this song, like when she's like, it's all in my head, I'm the one who burned us down, but it's not what I meant. Like, I'm sorry that I hurt you. And I always wonder if like, was it all in her head?
Exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, is this like, because like you can interpret it like when I say this is about, I always try to be like, this is kind of like the consensus of what people say. And if you were just reading it, that's what this sounds like. But if you're interpreting it when you're going through something personal or something that maybe your friend did or whatever have you, or you learn more about relationships, or you interpret it when you listen to other songs, like you said, it's like, yeah, it was all in my head, but also, or was this person just not giving you what you need? And then all of a sudden you lashed out because you're confused. And then they're like, whoa, calm down.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of, in particular, like straight men in relationships with women, they'll be like, poke the bear, poke the bear, poke the bear, poke the bear. And then when you finally get mad, they're like, whoa, calm down. Yeah. Like one of the most common things as women that we're told is to calm down. So it's like, oh, I got mad, I have to apologize. And I just feel like this song is like a really good way of explaining how sometimes you feel a little bit gaslit by people explaining like you shouldn't be mad or whatever. And so I think you can come from different perspectives of like, yeah, I was an asshole, or was I an asshole?
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about Gale Weathers, because we picked this song for Gale Weathers, this big Gale moment. And like, I really think that this is like the perfect song to describe Gale in this moment, leaving Scream 6, going into Scream 7. In Scream 6, Gale was kind of a mess from a writer's perspective, but more importantly, she kind of regressed from 5 to 6. Instead of improving and continuing to evolve, she went back to her old ways. And it wasn't well explained in Scream 6, so it's left everybody frustrated with Gale Weathers and the writing of her and the respect of her as a character. But there's, if we're going with the continuity, Gale has something to own up to, so basically in Scream 6, at the end of Scream 5, she said she was going to write a book about Dewey instead of writing a book about the murders. And in Scream 6, we learned that she went back on her word and she wrote the book about the murders and about Sam. And this caused a huge headache for Sam. Sam was vilified online. She was kind of canceled in a way. And it was a hugely destructive thing for the Carpenter sisters living out in the world and just for her own mental health. And Gale didn't really respect that. And like, again, as soon as the murders are happening again, Gale is there with the microphone, and those actions have really, put Gale in the light of being like, oh, you're just, you did something really bad to these girls who you should have been there for. You've lived through this 5 times. You should have had their back and you didn't. And you lied, and I think that like I can pretty much defend just about anything Gale Weathers has ever done, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions. I think that there's always an explanation for why she does things. And up until this point, it was always explained really well. And Scream 6 was that downfall. So going from 6 to 7, as we talk about what could Gale's unique thing be in Scream 7, I think is a really cool thing to look at. And especially because like, I actually think that Gale, even though we see her as a badass bitch who runs the world, who doesn't need anything from anybody, I do kind of think that she is like within this situation, and we see glimpses of it in Scream 6. We see it with how she interacts with Dewey and even Sydney sometimes. I think that she's a little bit more desperate for validation and acceptance from them and the people she cares about than her public persona leads on to be. So at this point, like, I know in Scream 7, she's not directly asking forgiveness from Sam, but she's going to be asking forgiveness from the audience to forgive her for writing that book about Sam. So I just think it's kind of like the perfect song to represent Gale in this moment where, I could see Gale, if they would have given her a couple more scenes in Scream 6, I think we could have seen a scene like this where Gale goes to apologize to Sam in a similar intense and desperate way. Because I could also see Sam giving her a hard time about forgiving her. So I don't know, Ash, what are your thoughts?
No, I completely agree. One thing that I didn't love about 6 was how that was unexplained, because I am totally on the side of, if I can totally understand why Sam was so upset and how the Carpenter sisters felt really betrayed, because it was almost like a hero and like a person that you probably relate, like, we're like, this is one of the only people in the world that can relate to me right now.
Right.
And feeling that betrayal or whatever they were feeling from her, that really did cause, or was something that helped to root a horrible like cancellation or whatever you want to call it. They're vilified in a way that wasn't fair. And I think all of that was also like, if we're going to go deep, all of that also had to do with the ghost faces of it all, doing gross shit online as it's do. But I would have loved a scene where Gale explained to them, I was in such grief that I wasn't thinking clearly. I made a mistake and I wish I would have wrote this differently or talked to you about it. Or because when people are in grief, they do stupid stuff. So I think it would have been totally fine if that happened. And then she went and talked to them and genuinely apologized. Like not like a half-ass apology, but like a really sweet, genuine apology. And I would have honestly loved it if Sam was like really open to the apology and Tara was the one who was a little bit more, because like, I think sometimes sisters can be like that. Like sometimes like I can take an apology and my sister can take an apology if you hurt one of us. But if you hurt the other one, then you're going to be like, I might need a little bit more, like hurt me, whatever. I can maybe help you. I can maybe move on, but hurt my sister. And there's a little bit more that I want to work out with you. Yeah. And I think it would have been really fun to see that. And I think Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega and Courteney Cox could have worked really well together in that scene. Yeah. I think it would have been fun for them to have a strong female role model in their life that they can look up to. And I think that would have been also brutal, because I think they probably felt like they had that because they might not have that with their mom. Exactly. And having this woman who can completely relate and then feeling betrayal from them is really sad. And I think sometimes people think that we don't like the characters of Sam and Tara, which is like not the case for me at all. Yeah. It's more that I don't like where they took their characters, and I feel like they could have, it bums me out that we didn't get what I think that those people were able, like what could have been. Whereas with other characters, I feel like they were brought up to a point where I really like it. And I feel like this is like, Afterglow is a great song for Gale, because it is one of those things where like, sometimes this should be an apology. And sometimes it should be, wait, I don't need to apologize for being strong. Yeah. It depends. Like it could be a case by case, movie by movie scenario where sometimes she was just doing her job. Yeah. And then sometimes we might have to ask ourselves, well, Gale Weathers, was it worth it? Like, you know what I mean?
Did you go too far? And
You go too far. Yeah.
And like, I think that this, if you would have described, like the way you described that, I completely agree in terms of like, I revisited Joey's Scream 7 recently, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was a Sam fan back in the day, back before certain things kind of set in about Scream 6. And the idea of like Sam and Gale having this conversation and Tara, like that would have been an amazing moment of acting, a moment of like character development, and an explanation for what happened, because it doesn't really make sense why Gale did it, and like Josh kind of, he alludes to something later in the episode where it's like, well, what if Gale tried to write about Dewey and she couldn't bring herself to do it, so she banged this book out because she committed to a contract and she needed a book to be released. Like that makes sense, and why it could have been explained, Gale regressing because of not having Dewey or Sydney there to help her through this time and grieving the loss of Dewey. It makes people do crazy shit, and I wish we would have gotten an explanation for that. And I think that the explanation would have looked a lot like this song. I just feel like, Gale, there's a vulnerable side to her that a lot of people may not pick up on, but it's really there. I think that she probably does have a lot of anxiety and insecurity about these people she cares about because of the conflict between her job and the sensitivity of real life. And, again, going back to the song, though, it's a very dramatic song. The beats, the sound, the meaning, it's unlike any other song in Taylor's discography, I think. And I just want to like imagine also like too, Gale is constantly looked at as though she's doing something wrong. And like you said, sometimes she's just doing her job, but at the same time, I think she still has to reckon with the consequences of the actions, even if she justifies them herself.
I completely agree that even the most confident person on the outside doesn't necessarily feel that way all the time. And people can have their confidence rocked no matter who they are. And anxiety sets in, and depression, anything like that can just hit you up with a ton of bricks no matter who you are. And I also really like the thought of this song of being like on the moments where she doesn't have to apologize, because I think sometimes people think of women in power and doing things like this as being calculated when really they're just explaining.
Yeah.
And really just doing, like, she's just doing her job. Like, I just feel like she's criticized for things that she doesn't deserve sometimes, but then very much so criticized for things that also weren't fair that she's done that might have pushed the line. And I completely agree. I think the song is perfect for her.
And like, even though we don't have Sam, and it's a shame, because like even in Joey's 7, there's a huge emphasis. Like, Gale takes on the motherly role of over Sam in that movie, in that story. So I'm sad that we don't get to see that in the real Scream 7. But but just in terms of the apology, and I think that we need to reckon with this idea of Gale's actions in Scream 6, in Scream 7, and to move on. And so I just want to read off some of these lyrics here. And imagine it's Gale going to Sam and trying to apologize to her, or Dewey or Sydney, but I think Sam is really the key here. So imagine her saying, "It's on your face. I'm to blame. I need to say, hey, it's all me. I'm the one who burned us down. It's not what I meant. I'm sorry that I hurt you. I don't want to lose you. It's so excruciating to see you so low. I just want to lift you up and never let go. Tell me that you're still mine. Tell me that we'll be just fine, even when I want to lose my mind. Tell me it's not my fault. Tell me that I'm all you want, even when I break your heart." I could see Gale having these feelings toward Sam and trying to atone for the book.
No, I completely agree. And I think Gale is one of those people who she craves the achievement and like the success, not in a bad way. I think we all want that. And like even in 4, you can see that she's struggling to get to that point where she might have been before. And I think those high highs and those low lows probably hit her pretty hard, and making decisions that might not be the best. And then all of a sudden you realize that you hurt somebody that you weren't realizing how badly you would hurt them. And all of a sudden you're just in a place of you just need to be not begging on your knees for forgiveness, but really trying and really working hard to get that forgiveness back and to get that trust back.
And I just feel like this could be Gale, not only with Sam, but with other people. I think that whenever it's someone she really cares about, I think that Gale is very strong and stealthy when it comes to not caring what people think. But when it's someone like Sydney or Sam, I think that she probably would, or Dewey, she would probably feel very insecure and desperate and anxious about needing that forgiveness and needing things to be okay in order for her to continue to function. Because I mean, that's how I am. Maybe I'm just projecting onto Gale, but I see it in Gale. So I don't know.
I completely agree.
All right, Ashley, thank you so much for this wonderful Taylor Swift segment. Where can they find you online?
You can find me at Squirrel and Spud 9 on Instagram, There you'll find my Etsy store, and you'll also find the really fun Scream Puzzle of the Week that Ryan and I make. It comes out every Wednesday, so keep an eye out there, and please play along and say hi.
Awesome. Thanks, Ash.
All copyrighted material used or referenced in this show belong to their rightful owners and made possible by the Fair Use Act.
And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
Get another beer, you want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back!